Welcome back to Small Caps, ladies and gentlemen. My name, Kerry Stevenson, and today I'm bringing you Professor Alex Sinclair, or Alexandra. Alex, she is the Executive Director and Chief Scientific Officer, can't get my words out this morning, for Invex Therapeutics. She's also the co-founder of Invex Therapeutics. The ASX code is IXC. We are going to be talking all about what they're doing in their phase 3 trials, but also it's all to do with headaches and, I'm going to try and get this right, Alex, idiopathic, intracranial hypertension. But we're going to call it
spot on.
IIH. Did I get that right, Alex?
Absolutely spot on. Perfect, Kerry.
Well, welcome to Small Caps, Alex. This is the first time you and I have had a chat. I've spoken to Tom in the past, but give us a brief overview of who Invex are, and also, I think, important to discuss your background, because you not only a co-founder of Invex, but you've got a very long history in, I guess, headaches, and that's a very common thing that we all suffer from. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your background as well as Invex.
Okay, perfect. So let's start with me. My background, I'm a neurology consultant, so I'm a doctor. I work in the UK, where I run the headache services for the West Midlands, so the middle part of the UK. So I run and deal with the treatment of patients who come in with chronic headaches, for example, migraine, like you were saying. And I also run the services for patients who have raised brain pressure, which we're going to talk a bit more about, because that's really the center of what this condition is and what this trial is about. And I have sort of three main passions, really. So I have a laboratory group where we do basic science, and I have PhDs and postdocs who are absolutely focused on understanding how raised brain pressure can be driven, and how we can regulate it, and how we can target it with new drugs, and how we can understand headache mechanisms. And then I have a clinical research group who are very focused on taking laboratory science and moving it into clinical trials in patients at different phases. So a whole team doing that of nurses and clinical fellows and doctors. And then my sort of third hat would be my clinical hat, which I was telling you, but I think suffice to say that we run one of the largest clinics in the world that deals with patients with raised intracranial pressure and headaches. So I kind of see where the need is in my patients. I hear from them on an absolute daily basis about the problems they're having, and then I go back into the lab and we try and solve those problems.
Wow. Before we get into Invex, Alex, how did you decide that this was an area that first of all you were interested in, and secondly needed some help?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And so when was that epiphany? When was that moment? And I actually did have a bit of a moment, probably when I was a junior doctor, at which point you're on the wards and you're going to see referrals. And I do recall a Monday morning when I was asked to go and see a patient on the ward. And I went in to see this very young girl who was very frightened. She was in her 20s. And she, over the space of the weekend, had increasing headaches and had lost her vision. And when I tested her vision, she could only count fingers in front of her eyes. So she really lost her vision. And she had a normal brain scan, and she was very frightened. And she'd had a lumbar puncture, which is the test that we do to measure brain pressures. That's painful for her. But it had come back with high brain pressure. And so she had this condition, idiopathic intracranial hypertension. We're going to say IIH. And she was terrified. And I had to sort of say to her, right, we need to now treat you because you're obviously going blind. And the treatments that we had available, well, there are no licensed drugs, and we're going to come on to that in a bit. But we have nothing really fit for purpose that's licensed or marketed to give her. And she actually, because she was going blind, went on to have interventional neurosurgery. So she had to have a tube placed in the center of her brain to drain fluid, and it drains the fluid all the way into the abdominal cavity to rapidly take off the brain pressure, to take the fluid off to save her vision. And it was a real stark moment of just clinical need. You know, this lady was in absolute dire straits. And then I saw more and more and more patients, and you began to see that there's a huge pattern here with a group of patients that just hadn't really had attention on the research side. So when my research labs got going, that was where I directed my attention, understanding brain pressure and how we could therapeutically target it.
I just have to ask, did she recover? Because that's quite, I mean, that was a very strong emotional moment for you. You know, she was young.
She was young, and, you know, if you lose vision when you're 24, it's absolutely life-changing, as you can imagine. So, yeah, she had the interventional brain procedure, the CSF shunt, as we call it. It did save her vision. But then the story doesn't end there. Those shunts, they have problems in the future. Half of them will block within a year. They have problems with infections, and it begins a very long and difficult road with this condition. It's a long-term condition. It doesn't just go away.
So that led you down the path of saying there's got to be a better way than shunts in the way we're currently
There's got to be a better way. Absolutely.
Okay. So that brings me to the setting up, because you were the co-founder of Invex Therapeutics. So tell us about what it is that Invex are doing. Give us an overview.
Yeah, so Invex Therapeutics is a small company. We're lean. We have a relatively small number, but very, very highly experienced staff who have had huge experience in different parts of the biotech industry. And we work virtually, and I think that's been a really successful model, particularly coming out of COVID, where anything else I think would have really hindered our ability to succeed. So we're a small, efficient, and high expertise company that have really taken the concept of my laboratory work and my early clinical work, and a company was spun out from the University of Birmingham with the IP of the patent that we filed at that point, which was to cover all conditions of raised intracranial pressure, alongside orphan drug designation for this condition in Europe and with the FDA. And that was moved into Invex Therapeutics. And hence the company then went through an IPO process in 2019. And that was really the start of our journey. And it's really been a very driven, focused, and like I say, efficient team to bring through all the paperwork to where we are today, which I'm feeling really good about, because we had our first patient into our phase 3 trial last week. But I'll come on to that in a bit more detail.
Okay. 2019 was when you listed, raised some money. Talk to us about, you've filed the patents. I just want to know, is there anyone else doing something similar to you? Or because I would have thought that headaches and the brain pressure area is something quite a few people would be looking at.
Okay, so I think there's two parts to that answer. People are interested in headache, and actually migraine therapies, which is a different condition, have been one of the biggest growth areas in neurology, with new drugs being approved by FDA and EMA. It's been a huge growth area in the last 2 or 3 years. But this is very different. This is idiopathic intracranial hypertension. It is not the same cause and not the same treatment. This condition is caused by raised brain pressure, so it's not the same as migraine. And in this particular area, we unfortunately don't have other people doing research in this area. It's been a really under-researched area. And I think hopefully what we've been able to do is to come up with is to identify a really important pathway that we can target therapeutically. And that's what's going into our clinical trial, the IIH Evolve trial. But we don't have competing drugs coming through. There are no other trials on clinicaltrials.gov. There are no other compounds coming through. And I can say that with a lot of assurance, because I'm well connected and well networked internationally. I sit on the research committee for the North American Neuro-Ophthalmology Society. I've just come off the International Headache Society board. I'm currently a board member of the European Headache Federation. I'm the deputy chair of the British Association of the Study of Headache. So I know the people that deal with these conditions. I know the doctors, I know the researchers, and there is nothing else coming through. But they also all know about us, because we've been presenting our preclinical data and our clinical data at national meetings over the last few years. So huge excitement from them that we are bringing all this through. It's important to them.
Wow, just listening to all the areas that I was getting a headache just listening to all the things that you're doing.
I don't want to give you a headache.
Talk to us about where you've come from to this date. I'm talking to you in late November 2022. And all the milestones you've hit so far, and then we'll go into the phase 3 and where that's going to take you.
Yeah, no problem. So when we went through the IPO with the company back in 2019, there were so many unknowns. We had an intention and a clear trajectory that we laid out to the market, and we stuck to that. But there were many risks along the way. At that point, we didn't have a PK profile that we were targeting. We didn't have a manufacturer, and we didn't have approvals. But, sitting here today, it's a much nicer conversation with you, because I clearly identified the efficacy of the drug at phase 2 to reduce intracranial pressure. We know the PK profile that we want to give a rapid burst of the drug and then sustained action.
Sorry, Alex, sorry to interrupt you. What's a PK profile?
Okay, a pharmacokinetic profile. So basically how the drug, when we reformulate the drug, which is what we've done, how the drug levels would rise and then stay in a patient's blood, so to make sure that it works at the correct level. What you don't want is a drug that can be too high and you get side effects, or too low and it doesn't work. So you have to know what the profile is that you want for this particular condition. So we were able to work out how much drug we would need in the patient's bloods to reduce intracranial pressure. We were then able to say, well, we want the drug to be a once weekly injection, not a twice daily injection. So we were able to, we reformulated the drug to make it work better and be more acceptable to patients. We then, once we decided how to do that, we needed to find somebody to manufacture. And so one of the other great successes of the last couple of years has been partnering with Peptron. And Peptron are a South Korean company, and they are manufacturing for us. And that relationship's been fantastic because they had a wealth of data on the compound, Presendin, as we call it, in terms of the preclinical, the bridging toxicology, and the early phase 1 trials. And what that really means is we didn't have to go and repeat all of that. We were able to use their data and save time and money. So that's been a great success. So drug made, drug reformulated, Presendin is now being manufactured in South Korea, assured of our manufacturing, but able to fast track because we didn't have to do all that early phase work and spend money and time on it. And then the next successes would really be our ability to actually open our trials. So you take all the information on the preclinical work and the drug, and you put it into an information brochure and into a regulatory submission. And we've been submitting in different jurisdictions around the world. And you'll see that we've had TGA approval in Australia, which has been great. And then we went to Europe. And in Europe, probably the hardest regulator is in the UK. It's the MHRA. And so we've been able to get approvals through the MHRA and open sites in the UK. We submitted our paperwork to the US, and we had our IND approved. And that's all been announced previously. But that was a great milestone as well. And actually, you'll hear an announcement later on today about another jurisdiction, which has just been approved today as well. And then from then, we're rolling out to get approvals in Israel, Germany, other sites in Europe and in New Zealand. So this whole big boulder of momentum is definitely rumbling along now.
How big is the market, the addressable market for your particular drug?
Yeah, so this drug targets a specific condition of idiopathic intracranial hypertension, and that specific market is a greater than a $1 billion total addressable market if we look at Europe, Australia, Canada, and the UK. The American market would further increase that. But it's also to say that whilst the company is very interested in IIH, and it's definitely our first indication, and that's what the IIH Evolve trial will be addressing, and to say also that we are fully funded to complete the IIH Evolve trial, this drug has the potential to work for other conditions. It's not specifically treating IIH, it's treating raised brain pressure.
Huh.
And that's interesting because there are many other conditions of raised brain pressure. For example, raised brain pressure is really problematic in stroke, after you have a stroke, after a traumatic brain injury, when you have meningitis or encephalitis or a brain tumor. So there's many situations where raised brain pressure is really difficult for the doctors to control. And still we have a lack of therapies in those other conditions as well. So we've been doing a lot of due diligence and considerations over the last year, particularly about how we will plan future pipelines and opportunities in those second indications.
That makes the 1 billion addressable market that you're currently looking at, the numbers are exponentially larger.
Yes.
Let's talk about the phase 3 clinical trials, which is where you're at right now with IIH Evolve. What's the time frame on that, and how difficult is it? I mean, I guess when you get to phase 3, you've gone over a number of hurdles, and it's the final hurdle. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Once the trial is open, you're in a really good position. And if I just give you a bit of a time frame, so I think that's probably of interest. So first patients have been recruited. We are predicting 24 months to recruit all of our patients, and we're looking to recruit 240 patients. The recruitment targets we believe are absolutely achievable, and that's because we did a lot of due diligence, what we call feasibility questionnaires. So we write to all the potential sites. There's 40 sites internationally. We write to them all and we ask them, if you know, how many patients do you see? How many patients do you see of this particular eligibility criteria? So we can try and predict our recruitment rates. So that's why we've chosen to do 40 sites. That's why we've chosen 24 months. And in a sort of rough back of the envelope calculation, that comes to about 6 patients per site over 2 years. So we're not asking too much of our sites. And I think that's important. We're being conservative and therefore, you know, realistic. You know, COVID has really changed recruitment of trials. And I think many of your investors will have seen other clinical trials having to close recruitment during COVID. We're through COVID now, and we're being absolutely realistic about, you know, what we think sites can deliver based on our feasibility assessments. So once we've got the recruitment done, the duration in the trial is a 6-month randomization period. And thereafter, the trial will close and we'll bring results back. And I hope we can chat about it again, Kerry.
Oh, so do I, very much so. When you were just saying those numbers, 240 patients, 40 sites, how do you come up with those numbers? I'm just right. Why isn't it 4,000 over 400 sites?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So first of all, how many sites? Well, that's probably easier to say. That's all those feasibility assessments. That's just because we have done our due diligence, written to the sites. How many patients do you see of this type over what time period? And then we multiply that up to make sure we have the right number of sites. In terms of how many patients, the 240, a lot of work goes into what we call power calculations, working out how many patients you need in a trial to achieve a positive, to be powered to conduct your study, to have a statistical chance of achieving a positive outcome. So we were able to use a lot of previous trial data. So there's been 5 previous randomized controlled trials run in this disease, IIH, and I've run 4 of them. So we've got a lot of previous data to understand the differences that you expect to see and the variability in data that you would expect. And we use that knowledge to help power our study. But we've also taken 2 sort of slightly strategic decisions with this study. We are powered for a primary outcome, but we're also powered for our most important secondary outcome, because we want to be able to make sure that we can cover that off with the numbers of patients in the trial. And actually, we're well overpowered for our primary outcome measure, which is a nice position to be in.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier TGA approval, UK approval. So once those, do you have to get further approvals after phase 3? I'm just not quite sure, or is it the drug approved, tick, done?
No, you have to get, once the trials are done, you would then approach the competent authorities in those jurisdictions. So we would approach the European Medicines Agency for an application to have market authorization, and we'd have to go through that process. So it's not an overnight thing. Once the trial results come out, there is a process to be gone through. But actually, you start that process very far back, and that's all in our sort of strategic planning and timing about how we then organise to get that paperwork and those data packages ready and organised to submit to the regulators to get that final market authorisation, which is what we're aiming for.
Alex, you've got a really strong background of understanding this sector and the opportunities within the sector. When you look at what you're doing, how do you then go about the distribution of drug? Do you get one of the major pharma companies involved, or how do you partner up?
Yeah, I don't think we can comment specifically about how the company will look at that point and how we will approach that sort of strategically. But the concept is that yes, you would need to have a process of marketing, and you'd need to have a process of drug distribution. And actually, in this disease, the prescribers are usually neurologists or ophthalmologists or accident and emergency doctors. So those are the doctors that we would target to use the drug. And one of the good things about doing this trial is that because I'm well known in the medical community and in the academic community, I've been blessed to have many good colleagues around the world who know about this trial, and they are really leaders in their field in themselves, and they are, really interested in the results. So we would turn to our colleagues internationally that we know we have a good network to provide information to the doctors within their jurisdictions, and to talk about, how, if the drug is, if pending a positive result, how the drug would be integrated into clinical care. And I think the other thing to say is that there is an international treatment guideline. So a guideline is a bit like a recipe book of what you do with the disease. It tells the doctors how they should treat the disease. And the part of that guideline where it talks about drug therapy is very empty because we don't have a licensed drug therapy currently. So we would look to hopefully really change how clinicians, prescribe and change guidance on how we could approach treating this condition. So when we look at marketing this drug, we would be approaching and educating and looking to talk to accident and emergency doctors, neurologists and ophthalmologists.
You got your work cut. I mean, you think it's simple, but it's not. There's a lot of moving parts, aren't there? Are there any challenges that you see coming up, or are you very comfortable from when you listed in 2019, talking to you at the end of 2022, the milestones you've hit so far, are you on track?
Yeah, we're on track. I feel really comfortable and quite confident as I've been coming around Australia this week, meeting people. It's been a really nice week to tell people how well we've done in it and how much we've achieved over the last couple of years. I mean, like I say, there were many points where if things hadn't gone well, it would have been really difficult for the company. But we've passed those points now. We've de-risked, first patient in, countries opening as we speak. So it's a really nice position to be in. And I think that the conversations now are about where will the future be. And I think that's interesting and strategic and also very motivating.
Where will the future be?
I think that might be more than I'm allowed to tell you exactly, Kerry, as you well know. But
well, just throw it out there occasionally. Alex, go on.
I would just say, suffice to say that, as I've mentioned, this drug is not treating idiopathic intracranial hypertension alone. It's a drug class that can lower intracranial pressure. So there therefore is that potential to have pipelines coming through for other conditions of raised intracranial pressure, like traumatic brain injury and stroke, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, those are the conversations that we now have.
Yeah, and I've done some chats before about just the stroke area. Yeah. That's massive in itself.
It's massive, yeah.
And needs some help too. So that's going to be very interesting. Look, we're running out of time, Alex, and I know that you've got a lot on your plate. You're in Australia only for one more day. Let's wrap this all up, if you don't mind. Everyone knows that I like to do this. Wrap it up in a bow and give us 3 reasons why our audience out there should sit up and take notice of Invex Therapeutics right now.
Okay, so I think that the audience should take notice of Invex Therapeutics because we have massively de-risked our program over the last 2 years. We've hit our regulatory milestones and we now have manufacturing of our drugs secured and in progress. This number 2 is a massive total addressable market of greater than $1 billion with just IIH and just if we look at Europe, Canada, UK and Australia. And then I think the final thing is to say that despite only being a $44 million market cap at the moment, we have a huge future potential with future pipelines on the horizon and future opportunities on the horizon. So I would say this is just the start in terms of our company growth.
Professor Alex Sinclair. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you on Small Caps Day. Congratulations on all the milestones. Getting into phase 3, ladies and gentlemen, they are well funded. They know what they're doing. They are a lean, mean machine, but they are addressing a market that needs to be addressed. Congratulations on getting to where we are. Come back and have a chat with me in the new year as you progress down this very exciting path for Invex. And as I said at the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, the ASX code is IXC. Thanks so much, Alex.
Thanks for talking to me, Kerry. Take care.